All right, good morning. Really excited to be here. I was telling someone this is my 15 minutes of fame. As one, I only get 15 minutes, which is kind of disappointing, but as evidenced by the fact that the neighbor ladies in my book club sent an email around, look, Connie's keynoting at this conference, and I was like, way to go. So, I've been working the audience to say, tweet a couple of good things so that I really establish a reputation in the neighborhood. Peter and I are here today to talk about faster payments, and I'm going to talk about a grand collaborative experiment that the Fed is sponsoring called the Faster Payments Task Force. And Peter is going to give one example of private sector innovation that's kind of going on in parallel with some of this industry-wide collaboration that's happening. I have 3 slides that's about an hour's worth of content, so I'm literally going to invite Peter to give me the hook if I start to bleed into his time. And we'd both like to invite you to stop us in the hall afterwards. We really have a lot to share. We're passionate about this. There's a lot of information in a limited time today. So how many folks in the room are familiar with a document that the Federal Reserve published in January called Strategies for Improving the U.S. Payment System? All right, a good number of folks. How many people are sick of hearing about it? Anybody? That means we're doing a good job. That's why I asked that question. So the paper was a product of 2 years worth of pretty extensive research and input gathering from stakeholders across the payment system. And what it does is articulate a set of desired outcomes for the future payment system. And in a nutshell, I can describe them. I've tried to string them all together almost into an elevator pitch as the desire for a faster, ubiquitous, safe payment capability, real-time payments in the U.S. that's broadly accessible to consumers and businesses. A safe and secure payment system that's nimble in responding to a really dynamic threat environment and enjoys a very high level of public confidence. More convenient, cost-effective, timely, cross-border payments. And a more efficient, virtually end-to-end full electronic payment system. And our hope is that overarching all of these desired outcomes, our hope is that these outcomes have been achieved through collaboration and participation of all stakeholders, and they're reflective of sort of the collective will of all of us. So the paper outlines a lot of strategies that we are sponsoring and pursuing in order to pursue those desired outcomes. Today, I'm going to focus specifically on faster payments and what we're doing in that space. But I would note that a lot of other key initiatives, including a Secure Payments Task Force, an ISO 20022 implementation strategy, and a lot of efforts around B2B electronification are already underway. And you can kind of get the full picture. Go to the website. You can read the Cliff Notes version or the entire 60-page paper. The website, I think, got clipped off the slide, but it's fedpaymentsimprovement.org. So let's talk about the faster payment strategy. To the surprise of a lot of stakeholders, the paper did not prescribe a faster payments, a real-time payment solution for the US. What the paper called for was a collaborative initiative, a faster payments task force that would represent all stakeholder interests and work together to identify effective approaches for real-time payments in our country. We kicked off that group, a call for participation in March, and then officially kicked off the work April 29th with the task force. We've got north of 300 registered participants representing virtually every corner of the payment space. We've got consumer interest groups and merchants and corporates, government entities, tech, solution providers, financial institutions, rules and standards organizations, consultants, lawyers, academics, all of them. And we've had a number of meetings now where we have hundreds of people in the room, on the phone, dialoguing about issues and trying to work toward producing some important work. The key areas of focus of the Faster Payments Task Force really are in a couple of buckets or phases. The first is this focus on really identifying and articulating the needs or requirements for a real-time payments capability. And that work is heavily underway right now. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But that's kind of the foundational of what do we need, expect, want out of this capability. And then the second phase will really be using that as a baseline. The task force will identify alternative approaches. How could we get there? What are the options for a real-time capability? And how do they stack up against what we, the industry, have identified as our requirements for that capability? So that is essentially the work of the task force. I will note, we have over 300 registered participants, but participation is still open. So if anything you hear today piques your interest and you'd like to get involved, again, you can go to the website and register to participate. So that phase one, I'm going to dive right into the weeds here to give you a flavor for the work going on, the really hard work going on. As I said, the task force is working first to identify the criteria. What are the criteria for a faster payment system? And you can see here that it's been structured into some categories: ubiquity, efficiency, safety, security, speed, legal, and governance. There are 36 criteria at this point. And for each of these, the task force is defining what is it, how would you know it if you saw it, and how would we measure or rate approaches on this particular criteria. Really hard work, you can imagine. Again, talking about 300 people trying to come to agreement on this kind of framework and this kind of detail. Those of you in working in mobile payments, some of these I think would be really core to some of your interests, and you might be interested in the detail or weighing in on those. Under ubiquity, it speaks to how will various entities, end users, and providers access the capability and system. What do we want that to look like, and how do various options measure up against that? Use cases. The criteria will speak to, are there use cases that are sort of the minimum viable? It needs to address these use cases. Is it the more use cases, the better? Are there particular ones that especially need to be targeted by a real-time capability? Speed. It's speed of clearing, availability of funds, settlement, all of that, and what are the needs and requirements for each of those. It's to the point now in the drafting process where there's debate going on between 2 seconds and 5 seconds. So really gritty, tough work. And of course, it's probably not a surprise to any of you that safety and security is the biggest category with 12 different things that are addressed. This is getting at risk-related issues, settlement, as well as technical security, authentication, a lot of those really key issues that the industry is grappling with, authentication and data protection, all of those things. So the task force has been working to really develop a solid draft of these, and in 2 weeks, actually about 2 weeks from today, the intent is to publish for external comment the first draft of these. And there will be some survey opportunities, kind of light. You can give us input on the really sticky issues and questions that we're grappling with, or you'll have the chance to dive deep and rate sort of the clarity and importance of every single one of these, if you so choose. So exciting work. The task force really has asked for and values kind of the contributions and the views from the broader stakeholder universe on some of these critical things that they're producing. And so I would encourage you to go to the website. If you don't want to join the task force and spend your time with 300 people arguing about 2 seconds versus 5 seconds, go to the website, register. You'll get notices and opportunities when there are input opportunities, surveys, events, webinars, that type of thing. So exciting work. Love to talk to you about it more as the opportunity allows. I want to be sure we leave time for questions at the end. So I'm going to turn it over to Peter to talk about FIS. I will mention that Peter serves on the steering committee of the Faster Payments Task Force. 19 people representing all of the segments on the task force that were elected, and really contributing a very significant amount of time, talent, and expertise. So let me turn it to Peter.
Thanks, Connie. So I'm going to put a couple things in perspective. And some of you, from last night, the cocktail hour and being around, most people in the room, when you think mobile payments, and the folks I've talked to, we talk World Pay, it's really around the mindset is cards and mobile payments at point of sale. And while that is a component of what we're going to talk about, faster payments, at least where the Fed got started, it's not about that. And I'll talk about the use cases. It's about converting cash. It's about making the ACH more efficient, the wires, the underlying rails that we'll talk about to be more efficient. Just to give you folks who aren't traditionally, if you're a mobile marketing person in the room, you're like, well, what does this really mean? So it's a new rail, the underlying thing of how money moves from a regulated bank account into another regulated bank account. That's what we're talking about, how it moves electronically, efficiently, safe, and ubiquitous, both here in the US and across the world. One other just comment, we're, a lot of us, actually I see a pretty diverse group, which is unusual, but normally, when I talk about faster payments, people think this is like a new thing, and well, what? And I work for a big global company, FIS. Some of us may not know, but we're a $6 billion company. We just bought another company called SunGard. We'll be $8 billion by the end of the year. And so we provide the plumbing for banks, processors, corporations globally. And that allows us to see these trends. So in, I believe since 1974, Japan's network has been real time. Since 79, the Brazil network has been real time. So there are other examples. We power the faster payments in the UK. That one gets the most potential hype because it is the highest volume going on. In the UK, you can do a real-time, good funds transaction, and we'll talk about that. So just to put in context what we're talking about. So I pulled a consumer slide because there's a lot of noise in the system. All the incumbents below, whether it's Square, Venmo, Apple Pay, we think of these as on top of the rails, all the ones on the bottom. So I'm just trying to give folks who aren't used to the guts of how payments really work. They have to use existing infrastructure, whether it's ACH, wires, to settle funds. We run a network. I was responsible for NICE, and we run a real-time debit network that clears payments, and ultimately it settles via ACH, which people don't fully appreciate. So one good thing is if you ask consumers, they would prefer their financial institutions to provide these services. I think we've done a horrible job as financial people. I've been in banking for a while. I ran one of the big banks' internet service. I also started a financial institution that I still remain on the board. And so I say that with living in a glass house, that I think we've done a horrible job as the innovators have really moved ahead. But I think as we move forward with faster payments, you'll see the banks will now have rails and ability to compete with some of these evolving things. The reason why FIs are just the thing I deal with, since we provide most of our technologies to financial services or those who provide services to them, we all know, the online, the infrastructure is old. There's a lot of pressure, so regulatory on fees, Durbin, it's causing a lot of pressure on the banks. The data is a mess inside financial institutions. And by the way, it's all good for FIS. We go in and happy to sell you a payment hub and make things more efficient. But these are things that take time in financial institutions to really evolve and get more efficient over time. And I think we're making strides, but it is very painful and very slow, and I certainly appreciate it. I wanted to give another perspective. I mentioned early on in my opening remarks. So this faster payments, where are the payments going to come from? Are they brand new? What happens? And so this is my model, my team's model. We predict there'll be 30 billion transactions over these new rails. Some of the information we got from the Fed hired McKinsey and did some of these estimates. We have obviously our own estimates, the banks that we serve, the global banks, and we looked at other markets around the world. So just think 1 to 2% of cash transactions. So you always hear the paying the babysitter, paying the lawnmower, the guy who cleans. But think about some businesses, even today, they pay an hourly worker, cash or under the table. But one of the things, 1 to 2% of cash is enormous and will really help this. ACH, so we predict 11% of the ACH today, and things that can't clear even if the Fed goes to ACH goes to same day, we think there'll be opportunities. So again, someone who works maybe at McDonald's who finishes a shift, they punch out, they can get their payroll put on a prepaid card, real time, right away, good funds, and walk out the door and go pay. That's a use case that people talk about being able to use that you can't do today in the US. I mean, over NICE, we own a debit card network. Yeah, you could do a push and you could put it on someone's card, but that means that person has to have a debit card. You have to know their number and things like that. So we're not talking about that. We're talking about not having their bank account. They can log in and it would be there where they want the money. So things like that. Card transactions, there's a lot of uses, especially if you think about businesses who want information about, we don't talk a lot about this, but like Connie said, we've done this before. We could speak for 2 hours, 3 hours easily, but it's the remittance information for the businesses. So things that businesses are paying for with cards today, whether that's invoices or whatever, and they really don't need to, want to, but they're just forced into it. There'll be, that's the big thing for large issuing banks. Always ask me, what's going to be the cannibalization for cards, and that's their big thing. And I don't think it's tremendous. And then wires. So think about transaction, $30,000 to fund an invoice from a business. Today, that's a wire, very expensive. Me moving money from my regulated bank account into Fidelity Investments to trade, because the market's down 400 points today. I have a margin call. How do I get that money in there? There's no reason I should pay $75 to be a wire. That should be, a 5-cent transaction real time from my regulated bank account into a non-regulated bank account. So the broker dealers are not banks, for those who don't really appreciate that. So there's a huge volume of thinking about money going from the broker dealers, whether that's Fidelity or Vanguard or any mutual fund houses, and moving in and out. That's a real big example. And of course, checks. And we can go into the B2B world and how many checks are still evolving. And eventually, with leadership of the Fed, most of these things are really to get checks out of the system. It doesn't say that anywhere in the paper. They don't, but as one of our strategies as FIS and the Fed is one, we have a strategy to be the last man standing and running checks for people. So we have the infrastructure across the US, we process checks, and so as electronics increase, we cover both sides of the coin. So we take over banks processing for checks. So I have just like 2 more minutes, and here's another view from a global perspective. So we think there's 333 billion transactions, and these are not the point of sale transactions. Again, not purchases. So e-commerce, as an example, this isn't the purchase. This is, I'm working with Microsoft for them to pay their developers overseas. So a credit push outside the US. These are, Apple does the same thing to pay for content providers who are people creating content on their site, or paying advertisers and people who make mobile games. All these push payments to push out are where we're seeing a lot of things. Clearly, cross-border payments, it's very difficult for anybody who has tried to send money, both real-time and at reasonable fees, and it's a huge opportunity. And one of the holy grails down the bottom left is businesses invoicing, billing, and today they write checks because there's really not, I talk about the data that you can go along with real-time payments, and we could just talk a whole day on what information and remittance information carries along with these payments to make these happen. And so it's not just about the payments, it's about the data that, and we call just broadly, you may have the term remittance, it means a lot of things to a lot of people, but broadly speaking, it could be remittance, so it's information data going to the cross-border, the recipient, or it could be invoicing or billing data. All that generically is called remittance data. And then treasury management, so liquidity for corporations to allow them to be more efficient. There's a lot of trapped cash, both domestically and globally, where corporations have to have trouble managing their liquidity. We do as well. We have big operations in Brazil, and you can't get money in and out, and so we're just making those things more efficient. So what role do we play? We already have a real-time payment network. We call it PayNet. There's originators and receivers. Again, I could spend the whole day on this, but just give you how we look at things. If you see on the left-hand bottom where we have the retail application, so it's cross-border transfers, P2P, expedited payments, and bill pay, you'll notice nothing says point-of-sale payments. So we're not talking about purchases. I'm not saying that won't happen. I think it will, but that's probably 3 to 5 years away. All these transactions that we show on the left are things that we can do today. We have banks and people participating, and the commercial applications on the right, and we'll be evolving those things. So just quickly, and then we'll take questions. So PayNet is a global money movement platform, enables real-time account access. We can do both. This is another language thing. People talk about debits, pulls, and credit pushes. The current, that's one thing we wrestle with at the Fed Faster Payments Task Force. Is this going to be a push-only system? Are we going to do pulls? There's a lot of, you open yourself up for risks when we do debits and we allow people unauthorized debits, and we can go payment geeky, and we can talk about all that. So in our world, it's all good funds. The originator pays access fees, and we will have a global coverage as we move into 2016. We purchased a company called Clear to Pay, which gives us, out of Belgium, which gives us infrastructure, which is all based on 2022 to get geeky for anyone who understands that. Today we have just under 1,000 institutions, about 25 million DDAs connected to it, and by the end of Q2, we think we'll have about 2,200 financial institutions participating. So with that, Connie and I will take questions.
Yeah, Connie, I'm just curious if there's going to be either a hang-up or a stumbling block with the larger banks and the clear exchange and what they would like to see happen on. Those kind of conversations take place, and there are people in the FIS camp, the clear exchange camp, people in the other alternative, is that kind of stuff get hashed out? Or?
So in terms of the task force, we have participation from lots of the major players, including the ones that you mentioned. And
All of them.
one of the interesting things that we actually, our first sort of task force decision was to pass a decision-making framework that says this is what it's going to take to produce something that says this is an endorsed task force decision, work product. And the framework really is designed to ensure that there is support across virtually all constituencies. So the task force is organized into 8 different segments: large financial institutions, medium, small, technology providers, so categories, end users, and for something to pass the task force, it has to achieve majority support in each individual segment, as well as supermajority support of the entire task force. So it's a very high bar. We want what comes out of the task force to be very credible and to have broad enough support that we can be confident it'll be used and adopted.
Yeah, I guess I was surprised by the low percentage of cash transactions, because up until now I've heard about faster payments being really debatable and I guess my mental model is they're using cash. How are you kind of taking the needs of the unbanked and shaping the future for customers?
Do you want to speak to the stats or? Yeah, it is, it's interesting. It's even a question that's being grappled with in the criteria when we talk about accessibility and access to the system. How will end users, banked and unbanked, access it? And that is an issue that I think is high priority across the industry. When we did our consultation paper a couple of years ago, it was a big theme in the feedback, is that any solutions that are developed moving forward need to help address that issue. And so it is a priority. We're not to the solution stage yet.
And I just make a comment. So those are my stats. And so, I work with the CFPB, which is also on the steering committee. And we believe that there's things underway to allow them to get bank accounts. And that's what we're hoping is growth in bank accounts. So that's why there'll be less cash in the future, because they'll be hopefully using bank accounts, checking accounts, like most, obviously, everyone here in the room. And so that's probably the reason you don't see it as great. So that's not how much cash will be taken out of the overall system. That's how much cash will move to this rail. Does that make sense?
Over here.
I had a question concerning the task force and just the overall effort. Where does the voice of the customer or the voice of the consumer play a role in the initiatives within the work that you do?
I'll make a quick comment. And so there's as Connie said, there is broad representation. So on the steering committee that I serve, there's people who represent the consumers. So I mentioned Gary Stein. He's a peer of mine, but he works at the CFPB. There's someone from the Pew Institute who represents that. There's what's her name? Yeah, Consumers Union, who represents that. And then people may not think that. Now, this is my opinion. The financial institutions, I believe, you may not believe, but they have a real interest in consumers as well, and they bring that voice. So they are well represented and have a loud voice. And as Connie described, the decision-making process, they have veto power, and they're small at the table with these loud, huge banks, huge companies representation. They absolutely have a voice at the table. But good question.
Hi, do you know where the card brands stand on paying acquirers faster, so that the acquirers can ultimately pay the merchant faster?
So I'm not going to comment about, we run a brand, we run NICE, we run one of the networks, so small.
Or Visa, MasterCard.
Right, so I don't want to comment on them, so I'm going to make it's similar, so we do similar things to Visa, MasterCard, and those rails, so from a NICE perspective, we would use those rails as they become available to pay issuers, to pay merchants faster. I cannot comment, and I'm sure the Fed will not comment on what Visa, MasterCard position is. So the answer is, we run a similar debit network just like Visa, MasterCard. You look perplexed. I'm trying to answer the question.
Well, no, I'm just saying because so much volume runs through it. I'm an acquirer. I'm trying to figure out how to pay my merchants faster, you know, what the outlook is.
Right, so we can't answer for those companies.
Other questions?
Great.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us. And like I said, if you have any specific questions you want to ask us offline, we'll be out in the hall or up here for a few minutes. Thank you.